What are the various types of alcoholic beverages in the world?
The highest level categories are fermented beverages like beer and wine, and distilled beverages, like liquor. The former are made by allowing yeasts, a type of fungus, to consume sugars and excrete alcohols. There is a theoretical upper bound to the concentration of alcohol that can be produced by this process, since the yeast cannot survive in alcohol and will eventually drown in its own excrement. Lovely image, right? In order to produce beverages above, let's say, 15% alcohol by volume, it's necessary to distill some of the water off of a fermented beverage. Of course, after the actual alcohol has been produced, it's possible to mix things together and add additional flavorings. There is a hybrid category of fortified wines, for instance, which are blends of fermented and distilled beverages. Gin is made by producing a distilled liquor, somewhat similar to vodka, and then infusing it with herbs. Liqueurs are made by adding flavorings and sugars to distilled liquors. Fermented beverages. In order to carry out fermentation, we need to feed some kind of carbohydrates to the yeasts. The choice of carbohydrates determines a great deal about the final product. Beers are produced by fermenting grains, usually barley, but also wheat, corn, millet, or rice. The Japanese drink sake, while usually described as rice wine, is essentially a beer made from rice instead of barley. Wines are produced by fermenting fruits. Generally, the word wine alone means grape wine, while other wines will be referred to by the name of the fruit, e.g., plum wine, blackberry wine, etc. Grape wines come in two main types, red or white, depending on the type of grape used and whether the skin is left on. Given that more has been written about these kinds of wines than all other beverages put together, I'll refrain from going into detail about this subject. These are the two most common types of fermented beverages, but there are other types of high-carbohydrate foods that can be fermented. Mead is made by fermenting honey. It was very popular in Western Europe hundreds of years ago, then fell from favor for a long time, but is currently enjoying something of a resurgence. Milk, too, can be fermented, although there is to my knowledge no common English word for this category of beverage. It's generally called something like kumis in the local languages where it's drunk. Some tree and plant saps can be fermented as well. Again, I don't know of an English word for the category, but pulque is the most prominent example. Distilled beverages. We can produce higher alcohol beverages by distilling fermented alcohols. Distillation is the chemical name for any process that separates particular chemicals out of a mixture. In this case, we're removing water from a mixture of alcohol and water, resulting in a higher alcohol concentration. There are different kinds of distillation processes, and they do matter, but I'll skip over them for the most part here. Usually, you do not just drink these right after distilling them, they'll often be aged in casks made of specific types of wood, where they pull flavor from the wood, or have additional flavors added to them after fermentation. One example is brandy, short for brandy wine, meaning burnt wine, which is made by distilling wine. Again, there are all kinds of fruits, so there are all kinds of brandies. The word brandy alone usually refers to brandies made from grape wine which have been aged in casks. Cognac and Armagnac are two types of this sort of brandy. Unigued brandies may be known as eau de vie, water of life, in French, generally together with the name of the fruit, e.g. Eau de vie de framboise would be an Unigued raspberry brandy. Other notable brandies include Pisco, an Unigued grape brandy from South America, Calvados, a French apple brandy aged in oak casks, Kirschwasser, an Unigued brandy made from cherries without the pits removed, and Grappa, an Unigued brandy from Italy made from grapes with their skins and stems left intact. Whiskey, or sometimes whiskey, on the other hand, is essentially distilled beer, though the sort of beer you distill to make whiskey is a bit different from the sort of beer you would normally drink. For instance, it doesn't contain hops, a flower added to beer to give it a bitter flavor. Common types of cask-aged whiskey include Scotch, malted barley, Irish whiskey, malted barley or grain, bourbon, corn, rye, Canadian whiskey, rye, and Tennessee whiskey, corn. Of course, these styles come down to more than just the grains used. For instance, Islay Scotches, my favorite of all alcoholic beverages, use malt dried over a peat fire, which gives them a unique smoky taste that's not present in other whiskeys, and Tennessee whiskeys, of which there are exactly two, namely Jack Daniel's and George Dickel, are put through a charcoal mellowing process. The most common Uniged whiskey is corn whiskey. I personally do not recommend drinking this. Let's pause for a brief tangent about styles of whiskey. Scotch will tend to have the most complex flavors and less sweetness than other styles of whiskey. There are different regions of Scotland that make different styles of whiskey. Islay, and the rest of the Hebrides, as mentioned above, make smoky tasting malts. Highlands and Speyside seem to be a bit more beginner-friendly. For the longest time, rye was pretty much the official whiskey of America. George Washington made his own at Mount Vernon. It's sharper and less cloying than bourbon. The Manhattan cocktail, whiskey, red vermouth, and bitters would have originally been made with rye. Prohibition changed all that by giving America a good sock right in the sophistication. Coming out, we preferred sweeter and less subtle drinks like bourbon and Tennessee whiskey, which pretty much took rye out of the running. Fortunately, it has been seeing something of a resurgence recently. Rum is a liquor distilled from fermented sugarcane byproducts. The word rum alone usually refers to liquors made from molasses, which is a byproduct of extracting sugar from sugarcane. It can be cask-aged for varying amounts of time, resulting in light rums and dark rums. Some types of rum, like cachaca and rum agricole, are instead made from sugarcane juice. Some people might just use rum to denote molasses liquors, and put the sugarcane juice liquors in their own category. Tequila is a liquor distilled from fermented agave hearts. Agave is a plant in the same family as the asparagus and the yucca. Like rum, it can be aged for different amounts of time. The tequila you normally see is made from the blue agave plant. Mezcal is a tequila made from the maguey agave. Neutral spirits are a bit different. This term refers to alcohol produced by any method in such a way that any residual flavor is removed and the result is simply pure alcohol and water, or as close as can be efficiently achieved without undue burden. Neutral spirits can be used as the base for a liqueur. Some cheap gins and vodkas are also made from neutral spirits. Vodka is traditionally made by distilling fermented potato juice. However, due to its neutral flavor, the term is also used nowadays for neutral spirits or similar products. Gin is made by adding juniper berries to neutral spirits, running some kind of redistillation process that I don't even pretend to understand, and then infusing with various herbs and botanicals. Chinese liquor, or baijiu in Chinese, technically belongs to the whiskey family, as it's made by distilling fermented sorghum. Sorghum is a type of grain grown in China. Most Westerners are not used to the flavor of sorghum, and when I've taken my white friends to Chinese bars in SF, they often aren't able to stomach these, but I've developed a taste for at least some of them. This is a very wide category, but I don't know anywhere near enough about it to do it justice. The ones I've tried are erguotu, an inexpensive, clear liquor, and moutai, which is what they serve the President of the United States at formal dinners when he visits China. Hybrids, liqueurs, fortified wines, etc. The beverages above get their flavor primarily or even exclusively from the process by which the alcohol was produced. When they do have additional flavors, they're usually in some sense a byproduct of the process used. Hops are added to beer prior to fermentation, for instance. Similarly, while cask liquors do pull a considerable amount of flavor from their casks, the aging is actually required for other reasons as well. There are many classes of alcoholic beverages, however, which do not get their signature flavors primarily from the process which produces the alcohol, or which contains several types of alcohol made by different processes giving a composite flavor. This is a very broad category and spans some of the best and worst kinds of beverage. The oldest beverage of this type is probably fortified wine, which is made by mixing wine and liquor, possibly with additional herbs or spices infused. Originally, the liquor was added as a preservative, but the style has now evolved to the point that certain fortified wines are among the most valuable wines out there. There are a few important types. Desert wines like port, sherry, Madeira, and Marsala are barrel-aged and fortified with brandy. Vermouth is fortified with neutral grape spirits and infused with herbs and botanicals. Sugar is often added as well. Vermouth is extremely important in cocktails, being integral to the martini and the Manhattan, which are two of the oldest and best cocktails. Another important class of beverage are flavored spirits. These are made by infusing various flavors into neutral spirits, or, rarely, into other liquors. Unlike liqueurs, flavored spirits do not have added sugar or juices. Gin is probably the most important. It's made by adding juniper berries and other herbs and botanicals to neutral spirits. Gin is short for Genever/Guinevere, a name derived from the juniper plant. Absinthe, too, was among the most important flavored spirits in its heyday, when it was roughly as popular in Paris as Coca-Cola in the U.S. Today, it's made by infusing neutral spirits with anise and a number of herbals and botanicals, including grand wormwood, Artemisia absinthium, from which it takes its name. Absinthe was for a long time banned in much of the world after a campaign that associated what were in retrospect effects of severe alcoholism with the wormwood in absinthe. It's now known that drinking absinthe is perfectly safe, and the drink is once again available on store shelves and in bars. Liqueurs are made by adding flavorings and sugar to neutral spirit base, or, rarely, another liquor. This is an absolutely huge category in and of itself, comprising both the relatively obvious choices like crème de menthe, mint, crème de cacao, chocolate, coffee liqueur, amaretto, bitter almond and/or apricot kernel liqueur, raspberry liqueur, and so forth, as well as aperitif and digestive bitters such as Italian Amaros, Campari, Cynar, Fernet, and Suzy. Summary. As mentioned in Naomi P. Safra's answer, this is not a clear-cut question since there are piles of categories and subcategories, and it's not clear where to draw the lines. As a consolation prize, here's a picture of part of the tree discussed above which may also function as a handy reference. 1. Fermented beverages. A. Beer. Alesh, pale Alesh, brown Alesh, Belgian-style Alesh. Lagers. Malt beverages. Sake. B. Wine. Grape wines, red wine, white wine, rose wine, sparkling wine, straw wine, ice wine. Non-grape wines, apple cider, perry, country wines. C. Mead. D. Fermented milk beverages. E. Fermented sap beverages. 2. Distilled beverages. A. Brandy. Casked grape brandies. Eau de vie. B. Whiskey. Casked whiskey. Scotch, single malt Scotch, Islay, Highland, Speyside, Campbelltown, blended Scotch. Irish whiskey. Bourbon. Rye. Tennessee whiskey. Canadian whiskey. Uncast whiskey, corn whiskey, uncast rye. Baijiu, light fragrance, heavy fragrance, sauce fragrance. C. Rum. Molasses rums. Sugarcane juice rums. D. Tequila. Blue agave tequila. Mezcal. E. Neutral spirits, some vodka. 3. Hybrids. A. Liqueurs. Cordials, fruit liqueurs, nut liqueurs, amaretto, coffee liqueurs, anise-flavored liqueurs, anisette, Galliano, Sambuca, Drambuie. Aperitif/digestive bitters may overlap other categories. Amar Pecan, Averna, Amaro Montenegro, Campari, Cynar, Fernet Branca, Suzy, Unicum. Herbal liqueurs, Benedictine, Chartreuse, Jägermeister, Kümmel, Metaxa, Striga. B. Fortified wines. Desert wines, port, sherry, Madeira, Marsala. Vermouth and friends, red vermouth, white vermouth, Lillet, Punt EMES. Bum wines. C. Flavored spirits. Gin and Genever. X-flavored Y, coconut rum, flavored vodkas. Anise-flavored liquors, absinthe, arak, ouzo. Aquavit. D. Resonated wines. Edit. 1. Beer and wine have technical meanings, but they're not always used in this sense. In particular, since beer tends to have lower alcohol content than wine, say 6% versus 10% by volume, sometimes wines with low alcohol contents will be referred to as beers or vice versa. For instance, barley wine is a type of beer with exceptionally high alcohol content, while apple cider is often considered like a beer despite essentially being a sparkling wine. 2. You can also age liquors for a short time in non-reactive containers, say glass or steel, in which case they go through some chemical reactions but don't interact with the container. I'll call these uniged here for simplicity, despite the fact that it's not strictly true. 3. Note that many of these whiskeys are made from more than one grain, e.g. bourbon may be half corn and half wheat. When I've indicated a grain, I've just indicated the predominant one. 4. Sugarcane is actually a type of non-grain-bearing grass, not a fruit, explaining why rum doesn't count a type of brandy or whiskey. 5. If, like most of Quora, you're in the San Francisco Bay Area, go to Red's place at Jackson and Grant to try this stuff, then go a block over to Kearney where there's a Chinese liquor store to buy it. I don't know of any other U.S. importers. Update: there's also one in Chicago's Chinatown called China Palace Liquor City. If you do, add a mention in the comments. 6. The kind of wormwood used to make absinthe was correctly known to contain the extremely potent neurotoxin thujone in its essential oil. However, the amount of thujone present in absinthe is so low that you'd die of alcohol poisoning long before you could drink enough absinthe to have any effect from it. As a result of the anti-wormwood campaign of a century ago, there's been a persistent misconception that thujone can be used as a recreational drug, which is false. It doesn't cause hallucinations or any other desirable effects, it's just a poison. Note, by the way, that many essential oils are similarly toxic, and should be treated with extreme care. Several people have permanently damaged their health or died by drinking concentrated wintergreen oil out of the bottle while making candy. A single ounce of it contains the equivalent of 200 aspirin pills. I am not a physician and this does not constitute medical advice of any kind.
Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future also. Don't forget to like and subscribe to you never miss a video.